right, so welcome everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me. Hopefully you can all see my screen. You should see the negotiation screen on your, okay, perfect. So welcome. This session is one that we're all very, very excited to have for you tonight. As Teresa mentioned, there was a lot of excitement around having a session on negotiations, and it is part of an emerging series that we, as part of the Program for Faculty Development, Leadership and Management team, are putting together. It's called Leadership and Management Essentials, and this is Negotiations 101. So in terms of why you're here at the session tonight, there may be multiple reasons. Perhaps you have an upcoming discussion that you would like to prepare for. Perhaps you just feel as though negotiation scenarios in your life have not gone well or according to plan in previous circumstances. But in any case, for any reason, this is a great way to brush up on your skills. And we are going to encourage you to look at not just the theory, but also the different cases that we'll be presenting to you as opportunities to apply the different tips that we're looking to have you take away as skills or optimized skills for you to be able to have better conversations and negotiate things in your favor. So as you know, my name is Sarah, but I'm not doing this presentation alone. I am doing this presentation with three wonderful colleagues, including from left to right, Dale Kalina, good wave Dale, welcome, Sean Mondo, thank you Sean, and Catherine Tong, joining us from Kitchener-Waterloo area. We all live in the same general area in Ontario, but the wonderful thing about these Program for Faculty Development sessions is very often we operate regionally. And I think during the COVID-19 pandemic, it's increasingly clear that this is advantageous for us to be able to bring our collective insights and knowledge together to be able to provide sessions like the one tonight. Before we really get started, I wanted to acknowledge the traditional territories of Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. As the Fast University, we are located on these traditional territories, and I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge these lands and all that has happened on them. Okay, thank you. As you know, this meeting is being recorded, so it will be available for viewing afterwards. We would like you to take the time right now to turn on your camera if your camera works, and especially turn it on for the interactive pieces of the workshop. We will be talking to you. You will be speaking with one another, and so it's easier to speak to someone who is on a screen as a human being as opposed to just letters on a black screen. Thank you for those who turn their cameras on. Mute yourself unless you want to speak. Sometimes we do have background noise that we don't intend to be there, and muting yourself is just a great way to prevent any unwanted sounds from entering into the audio. Ask any questions in the chat box. No question is a bad question. Feel free to pop that into the chat box to myself, to any of my colleagues, or to everyone who is currently in attendance. We will be using breakout rooms. I just wanted to make sure that everyone knows that when a breakout session starts, you actually need to click accept as the window pops onto your screen. Otherwise, you will not move anywhere. You will not be taken to a breakout room, and you'll be left alone in this room. So just make sure that you hit the accept button when you are requested to join a breakout session. Stay in the room once you are in this Zoom workshop. This is going to take around an hour and a half or 2 hours, so we please ask that you stay for the duration of the session to not disrupt the size of the breakout sessions, as we do want to have small group discussions. And last but not least, we will be emailing you a survey. So at the very end, please do be kind and complete the survey. You don't have to rank us very highly if you didn't enjoy the session, but we hope that you do enjoy the session. And we appreciate any feedback that you can provide to us so that we can improve and continue to get better. The agenda for tonight is quite packed. So we hope that you learn a lot, but that you also engage a lot. This is the introduction here, what I'm going through right now. Then we're going to go into some opening theory, a quick exercise to emphasize when negotiation is a possibility. And then I'll have each of my colleagues lead you through a different set of exercises. The first exercise, case 1, is going to be led by Sean. Afterwards, we'll debrief. We'll go back into the large group discussion. We'll debrief for about 10 minutes. Then we'll move on to case 2 with Catherine. We'll spend some time in small group discussions, then again, come back and debrief. And the last half-hour discussion will be facilitated by Dale. And that's just a high-level discussion on negotiations. If you have any questions that don't directly pertain to content that we discussed, we encourage you to open it up to everyone at the end of the session. Without further ado, let's get started. So what is negotiation? I'm sure everyone here has a different interpretation of what a negotiation is and what it isn't, but I thought that it'd be great to start off the discussion by defining what exactly a negotiation is. So a negotiation, as a definition, is a strategic discussion between usually about 2, maybe sometimes more parties to resolve an issue. And typically a negotiation involves elements of give and take. It's never really a situation where one person gets exactly what they ask for, what they request. It's never that there are demands and only the demands are being satisfied. That is not a good negotiation. So give and take, that's one of the key elements of a negotiation. Now, sometimes we struggle with identifying when we are in a negotiation scenario. And there are 4 different elements that are listed here on the slide that I want you to remember when looking to identify a scenario in which you can actually have a conversation around your needs, your desires, but also strategically approach it through the frameworks that we'll be taking you through today to be able to achieve an outcome that is going to be either mutually beneficial or more beneficial for you than it is initially as presented to you. So the key aspects of a negotiation, so when should you negotiate? The first element is that there's a fixed circumstance and changes are hard to make afterwards. So usually when you're negotiating a situation where there isn't going to be a lot of flexibility after the decision is being made. The second aspect is that you can clearly articulate what you are seeking and why. A lot of the time when you have a negotiation, you need to clearly understand what your constraints are, what your boundaries are, what you will not settle for less than. And so when you can clearly articulate the value that you are looking for and why, that only strengthens your position. And so that is an opportunity to begin to negotiate. A third element is your decision to accept or decline is dependent on the offer. Very oftentimes, especially when it comes to job negotiations, elements of the job description or elements of the contextual realities of what you're getting into will dictate whether you want to or you don't want to enter a particular arrangement. And so if you can clearly see that you will accept or decline a particular arrangement based on what you can or cannot get out of a situation, that implies that you should negotiate because it has clear implications for what you are going to do. And last but not least, there will be a lot of dissatisfaction for you if you do not negotiate. And that ties very closely to element number 1 here. It is all about static circumstances. It's about things that do not change after decisions are made, after things are signed, after discussions are had. And so if you ever find yourself in a situation where dissatisfaction will be something you experience, and it is strong dissatisfaction after the negotiation possibilities are passed, then again, probably should negotiate. So just to review, it's a fixed circumstance. You can clearly articulate what you are seeking and why. Third thing is that your decision is dependent on whether you're able to resolve or change the circumstances. And then if you do not negotiate, you're actually going to have a lot of dissatisfaction in the long run. Now, when it comes to testing out whether something is or isn't a negotiation scenario, we're going to be walking you through several cases throughout tonight. And it's important to notice that although we may typically think about negotiations for salaries, as an example, as one of the traditional scenarios for when a negotiation is possible, many of the scenarios that we're going to run you through are not going to be as explicit. And the example that I'm going to show you right now is going to be one of those situations where you could negotiate, you could not negotiate, or you could simply choose to think about things more and come back and reflect with perhaps some other option. So you're going to see a Zoom poll that pops up on your screen after I show you this scenario on the next slide. And I'm going to ask that you use your mouse to select an option as to what you would do in this particular scenario. Remember that the options are going to be to keep the offer, to negotiate a better offer, or to refuse the offer. So the example here is on the screen, and we're just going to read it together. So Rennie is a 45-year-old woman who has been approached by multiple individuals to consider the role of division director of her academic unit. The other clinical leads see her as someone who will be very influential to the junior people in her group. Rennie has recently been asked by her clinical chief to consider stepping up into a leadership role. So what would you do? The clinical chief is asking her to step up into a leadership role. As Rennie, would you keep the offer? Would you negotiate a better offer? Or would you refuse the offer? Okay, so as soon as you're done selecting your options, just click submit. And then once we get to Teresa, maybe around 70 or 80%, then we can close the poll and we can see what the results are.
Okay, there we go.
All right, let's see those survey outcomes. So it looks like 18% of you said to keep the offer, 75% decided to negotiate the better offer, and 11% decided to refuse the offer. All right.
Sarah, I was running the poll, so I didn't get a chance to be able to respond, but I personally would say that depending on what Rennie wanted, she may want to refuse the offer. Sometimes, even though everyone sees you as a leader and if people are telling you to go do something, if it's not the direction that you wanted to head, then she should feel inclined to refuse the offer. The offer will probably come again if it's something that's they can't find someone else, or it's just another opportunity will come about. And so I think that this would be somewhere where I would explore with Rennie if I was her mentor or her friend. I would say, hey, what do you want? Because just because people are telling you what to do and encouraging you, that's flattering, but it's a compliment, not an order, right? You have some freedom in at least our cultural context to be able to do that. And even in the other cultural contexts, I think it's possible to. You just have to do it in a nuanced way.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. So so we got a little bit of all perspectives, and I love how we end with this concept of stepping up is not always stepping forward, and we all want to move forward, but going up in the ranks isn't always a step in that direction for everyone. So thank you everyone for sharing your thoughts. Okay, so now let's move into the exercises. So actually, sorry, before we move into the exercises, I wanted to review how the session will go once again. So we're going to do case, framework, debrief, case, framework, debrief. And so in having these discussions, in reflecting back on when a situation is negotiable, and then applying a new framework every single time, we hope that you will continue to enrich the way that you look at all of these scenarios. And when you come into a situation for yourself, you can not just look at the scenario in an appropriate manner, in a strategic manner, but also do all the required prep work to be able to negotiate in the best way possible. Now, when we're looking at the scenario that we just discussed, let's think about it from the breaking down negotiation scenario perspective. So this is framework number one. So we said that the first element of a negotiable scenario is a fixed circumstance is proposed and changes hard to make after that. So was this a fixed scenario? And when is the next time to change this? It seems like it would be a relatively fixed scenario, correct? You would have to step into a leadership role, and to get out of a leadership role, you would need to exit earlier on in the term, or perhaps after 3 to 4 years. You don't know how long the term is, but it seems like it's a relatively longer term arrangement. So check number one. The second thing is you can clearly articulate what you are seeking and why. So here, we actually didn't have any information about what this individual wanted. We didn't know if Rennie wanted a leadership role. We didn't know if she could clearly articulate her value or a reason why she wanted an increase in pay or a decrease in other responsibilities, or even not want these additional responsibilities at all. We didn't actually have that information. So here we don't know, question mark, but if you are able to articulate the reasons why you do or you don't want something, and then additional information that would pertain to benefits that you would like to have in addition to what's being asked, then you can see that that would be a check mark. Number three, your decision to accept or decline depends on the offer. So again, you didn't have enough information to be able to determine whether there were all the non-negotiables that Rennie would want. But in a situation, you would usually ask for more information to be able to determine exactly whether this context is what you want to see yourself in the future. Again, if it's a step forward, or if it's simply a step up and it's not necessarily forward, it could even be a step backwards in certain situations. And then last but not least, there will be a lot of dissatisfaction if you do not negotiate. The way I read the scenario actually was that this was just going to be an additional set of responsibilities for Rennie, and perhaps there wouldn't even be any real reward or recognition for it beyond simply a title. And so that could lead to dissatisfaction for Rennie in the long run. But again, we didn't know enough. However, if you do find yourself in a situation where you are not negotiating, but you know that by doing nothing, you're basically going to become very dissatisfied, you need to start thinking about how to negotiate, how to counter what is being offered to you. And we'll talk about the best alternative to a negotiated agreement, BATNA, that concept later on in tonight's session. So that was our beginning. And now I'm going to transition to our case-based exercises. Sean is going to introduce you to case number one, which is currently on the screen. And then we're going to break out into small groups. The four facilitators will be breaking into those groups along with you to help to facilitate the dialogue. Sean, over to you.
All right, thanks, Sarah. Okay, so I'll read out this case for you. So I want you to try to put yourself in the shoes of the individual that is approaching the job market here, and see it from their perspective. And then we'll do a little bit of a change in those perspectives when we get into the breakout. So imagine the Faculty of Health Science, Department of Internal Medicine is hiring a new clinician, and they're specifically looking for someone to make significant contributions to the quality improvement effort. So you are a hematologist and you just finished your medical residency at McMaster University, at the place where you're looking for the job. Before medical school, you did several quality improvement projects as part of your master's in health research methodology, and you're confident that your skill set is a perfect fit for the job description. You're a natural leader, and you're also hoping to lead a few project teams right out of the gate. After being interviewed for the position, you received the offer. There is no mention of any additional compensation for quality improvement work or a leadership role. In fact, the package appears identical to one that could be expected for any new member of the department. Do you accept, reject, or negotiate the offer?
So we're going to break out into groups. So groups of, Teresa, I believe 4 to 5 people.
It'll be 6 to 7. There's 5 facilitators, so there's one per group. Yeah. All right, I'm going to open the rooms now.
All right. Okay. So interestingly, nobody said refuse the offer. I think that's the place to start here. So can anybody tell me why you wouldn't go down that road? Like why it's a crazy thing to refuse the offer?
Because as a physician, there's not a lot of jobs as a specialist.
Yeah, we had that brought up in our group that as a hematologist at McMaster, those jobs don't come up very often. So it wouldn't be very clever to say no to the job. And I would agree that knowing that background environment is kind of helpful to decide whether or not that would be a reasonable choice or not. Did anybody vacillate around, refuse the offer, but then decide later on that no, they probably should negotiate? Or was there anybody who felt staunchly about this thing and then moved away? No. Okay. So folks really, so there's a propensity here. 84% of you said negotiate a better offer. And you don't see this very often in residency where people come out of residency into their first offered academic gig and negotiate the job. Like I see smiles in the audience right now, thinking about doing it, right? People are like, yeah, like I said that here, but I don't know if I do that in real life, right? So tell me why you think this is possible. Like, what about this case made you feel like you could negotiate?
As a co-facilitator, one of my points of view here is that a lot of the time we think the negotiation is mainly about money, and it's not. I think you need to brainstorm a list and actually find out, and this is where the recon is really important. You need to talk to other, maybe people that are maybe a few years into their career, find out what they actually end up finding out that they could get. Things like, oh, did you know there are career awards and you can get someone like to help you win that? Did you know that there are opportunities to maybe ask certain key members and movers and shakers to have FaceTime with you because they're in your department, and you can hang out with, if it's the McMaster FHS, you might be able to hang out with a former dean or two and really just, strike a mentorship relationship that you couldn't buy some of those kind of opportunities, right? So do think about the alternatives to financial remuneration. There are lots of things that are in kind that can be so invaluable, you couldn't have gotten them off of Amazon.
I'm going to channel, though, something that I have heard from Maria and from Lindsay about gender differences in negotiation, because I think it's an important thing that we should spend some time on. And I'm going to channel you, Teresa, and Sarah, and Catherine, if I could, around some of your lived experiences and your views on this, if that's possible.
Oh yeah, this is like one of my favorite topics to rant about. Okay, so so there is a perceptual difference between men and women in terms of when you go to bat. With women, one of the things that tends to go better in evidence, like the evidence base is pretty strong around this, is that if you go to bat for yourself, people will not like it. If you go to bat for everyone or the system, people will see you as a strong leader. So for instance, if Jacinda Ardern, she's an example where she will negotiate with the entire country to put some masks on and do things because it's better for everyone. She could not do what a certain president in the United States is doing right now, to ask everyone to come to rallies despite evidence and despite science, just because she thought so. Right? Those are two very different strategies, and it's playing out in the world right now, one way or the other, which one is more successful. But often with women, one of the challenges is that people associate women with that caregiver role implicitly in their head. And so if you lead into that, so for instance, if I were negotiating and this was a female trainee that was negotiating this job, I might coach her to say, sell them on the vision of how awesome the system will be if they can carve out some time to protect you, to be able to make great strides in building up a whole cadre of people that could actually foster QI everywhere, and inspire the residents and mentor junior staff and bring it to a vision, as opposed to I need protected time, I need admin support. Those will not go over well. In fact, for men, those same techniques probably work, but women have to use them and men have the option not to, is the way that I would kind of explain it based on my reading of the negotiations literature.
The other way to channel that similarly is, instead of exactly like you said, T-Chan, to go to bat for yourself, which is, awkward and difficult and probably not very attractive for anybody, is to negotiate for your role. So it sounds like in this particular case that QI role may not have existed before, which might be the reason why there was nothing about it on the contract. Perhaps lobby for more resources to support that role, so that in the future, whoever going to be in that role will be well supported as well.
It's a cultural phenomenon. So even women will prefer other women not to be agenetic. we can get into that whole thing another time. That's probably a great discussion. We have other sessions in MacPFD to talk about that, but the literature is pretty clear that even women, when looking at, for instance, in emergency medicine, we expect all of our trainees to be able to lead resuscitations, but women will be as commonly coaching other women to step up and be more like loud and be more assertive, and expect that male pattern of leadership just as much as men are. And so it is something to think about when you're at the table about how do you check yourself with those balances, both men and women that are on the call today, because you don't always have to act like DJT in order to be a leader. There are other patterns, and sometimes we just don't see and appreciate them right away. And I think that the world leaders have been changing that, right? Angela Merkel, Jacinda Ardern, they're flying in the face of that and being very successful objectively. And so I think it's worthwhile to pay attention to whether or not that will change over time. But I think that's why we need to initiate EDI training and other things. And Sharon's bringing up that's talking about the implicit bias and talking about the job in abstract before you look at candidates. There's actually two really important evidence-based things that you should do. EDI is equity, diversity, and inclusion, by the way, for those people who aren't down with the 3-letter lingo. And there's a lot of that in medicine. I believe ABC means like 4 different things in medicine. So Sarah, would you like me to screen share, or did you want to?
All right. We do have one framework that we were just going to discuss here. We talked about what we learned, how we prioritize perspectives. This is just a quick framework on building empathy and adopting new perspectives. These slides will be shared with you afterwards for you to be able to review and apply these frameworks later on. But essentially what this is taking you through is who's involved in the scenario, what are their sources of power and influence, and how really powerful or influential are they in the scenario of interest? How impacted are they professionally or personally by the decisions or the final outcomes of the negotiated scenario? And then a bit of an analysis on what they need versus what they want. So we can talk about this a little bit more in the next case, but again, this is going to be provided as a resource to you. And if you have any questions about how to use any of these frameworks, always happy to engage in a dialogue through email or with a one-on-one conversation. Now we're going to move on to scenario 2. Here, there's going to be a little bit more flexibility. There's going to be 3 scenario 2s available, actually. And so every single group is going to decide which one they actually want to go through. Catherine, over to you.
So these 3 scenarios are written to be inclusive of folks on the call today who may not be academic physicians or may not be physicians and in other types of clinical work or learners. So these are kind of less traditional kind of negotiation scenarios where the 2 parties involved in the case would share some purposes, but then they would have other opposing interests as well. So 2A is about a teaching scenario where during the pandemic, you are a clinical educator interested in setting up an online patient simulation learning toolkit because in-person simulation is no longer possible because of the physical distancing rules. So you're making a set of Google Slides that can be customized to teach UG students and residents during the pandemic. At this point of your career, you're interested in developing your own niche in medical education, and you believe that this is your opportunity and a great way to explore this method of teaching. Your department chair, however, is not immediately supportive of your efforts. It doesn't seem that the benefit is obvious to them. And they question why you're spending your time on these new ways of teaching. They're proposing that can you just continue to teach simulation the way that it normally is and try and adapt it to the new safety rules. So the goals for each of these cases are the same, which is build empathy, adopt new perspectives, and then make your decision and consider all the different ways to move forward. 2B is about a family physician who is practicing with a large team of 12 other physicians, as well as many staff members at their very large clinic. Public health has offered to provide swabs for your clinic to start doing COVID swabs for your patients. Although previously a patient can only go to a local assessment center just to get swabbed. So they've been basically not coming to your clinic for that. So there's high demand for this in your community. You feel that this is doing a great service for your patient. For your patients, it's obvious to you that you should go ahead and order these swabs. However, your team is overworked. That includes both physicians and staff. And there's some anxiety about adding this new initiative to the existing workload. And there's maybe some safety concerns towards the staff and other patients as well. And lastly, I think the last case is about a bed block situation in the emergency departments. So the community has been hit with a high volume of respiratory illness this winter. And unfortunately, because of the very stringent rules of isolating ARI positive versus negative patients, your emergency department has been squeezed in terms of space allocation. And as a result of not having enough amount of isolation rooms and the difficulty with turning them over, you're experiencing very long wait times, and patients are probably not being able to observe physical distancing rules in the waiting room, and you're quite concerned about safety towards staff and each other. And you would like to propose to the hospital to build either a temporary or a permanent isolation unit to use during this season for the purpose of safety. And you're asking for funding from the board of directors of your hospital. So we're going to go into breakout rooms, and depending on the makeup of each breakout group, I think we only have enough time for everyone to just choose one case. And then we can go from there and come back and debrief. All right. Well, these are very different on the surface, but rather similar themes underneath it all. I think we can probably all anticipate that if we were to poll everyone about whether that situation is an accept, continue to negotiate, or reject.
I'm happy to poll again. So shall we poll on 2A first?
Sure. Okay. Let's do this in 10 seconds because I think we have seven people.
People are doing it. Awesome. Okay, so that's for the first group.
So for this particular case, negotiating a better offer would mean some kind of a conversation between the chair and the teacher about how to proceed with an innovative teaching method without changing too much the structure of the course from the comfort level of the chair. So we all agree that obviously some kind of innovation is necessary in this scenario. It's a matter of give and take, looking at the priorities from each party, maybe have a conversation about why it is that the chair is reluctant to move forward with changes. Maybe they're professionally impacted in some ways that is not known to the teacher. So certainly that is something to be negotiated for. For those who said accept the offer, in this particular case, that means basically step back and say, okay, fine, we'll just shelve this and I will just continue to teach as close to what we used to do as possible.
All right, so next case, Sarah, can you put that up and I'll put the poll up. So this is the swab clinic and it's like Harry Potter and the extra swabs.
So accept the offer in this case would be to back down from your team and say, okay, fine. I understand there are 70 of you and one of me, so you win. Or continue to have a conversation and negotiate with the team, or push ahead, which I don't think you could in that situation without the support of your team.
Okay, I'm going to end the poll and show the results here.
So the vast majority chose to negotiate a better offer. My group had this case, and we started out quite pessimistic about the merit of bringing this program into a large team of people who are opposing it, who obviously have very legitimate safety concerns. But as we delved into the priorities and the reasons behind each party's concerns, it became clear over time that this is probably something that will be inevitable for all the clinics. and that this is more about how can we as a large team solve this problem together, as opposed to what one person would want over the interest of everybody else.
We had a really good conversation around this case as well, Catherine. Our team kind of talked a little bit about exploring all the logistics and how it's important for the leader to bring the team a really solid plan, right? In this case, that you need to show that you understood all of the things that might give them anxiety, all the lack of preparation. You need to really support them, but you also need to listen to them to understand what the source of that anxiety is. And is it that they're already working at 110%? They're feeling that this might be the straw that brings the camel's back. Are they feeling that there's not enough PPE? And there's so much listening that needs to be done here. It's really important. I also shared an article about COVID and leading in COVID that I thought that everyone might like. It's in the chat right now. It's a JAMA article that is written by Shannon Felt and colleagues this year around what frontline healthcare practitioners want from their leaders when you kind of talk to them, and they give a conceptual framework for what you should try to do. And the first thing they actually ask you to do is just hear me, right? That's what people who are working for and with you in your teams will want you to just hear them as a leader, to hear their concerns.
Yeah, and we talked about there's no rushing of that part. Every person might be heard and brought over to the other side one at a time. There's no efficiency around that. In the book, Never Split the Difference, it was described that every person involved in negotiation has two basic needs. One is to feel secure and safe, and the other is to feel that they're in control. So for the team members who feel that this was done to them, it's easy to see how this could backfire very easily.
All right. So maybe we'll move on to case C. And I think, Dale, you said your team did this one? I'd launch the poll, see what everyone thinks.
Go for it. Maybe while we're doing the poll, I'll add some context to that last one. I know that Catherine wrote it, but that's a scenario that I've been living every day these days. And maybe to turn it on its head a little bit, so I was one of the people that accepted that offer. It's interesting because that could be an opportunity to build further innovation, but further efficiencies. So it in and of itself could change the challenge for that team, I think. So I think that there's a lot to discuss. And you're right, I think Sean mentioned as well that it's a big listening task. And I think that it's exciting to hear where people want as that team to contribute and to be together to build something together. I think there's a lot of exciting things these days, though.
Great. Okay. I think one of the keys is really when you are going into negotiation, even if you're not the leader, is to listen to the other side and do a really, really, really good job at truly thinking about how you understand all the players at a table. If you're just lucky enough to be at a 2-point negotiation where there's only two sides, then that's simple. But most of these negotiations in the messy workplace will have multiple players, multiple actors, and you really just need to understand all of the psychology before you go in. All right, I'm going to end the poll there, and I'm going to show you what people thought for this one.
Right. So the key to this case is that, like Teresa said, it's important going into a negotiation to have done the homework. Well, first to recognize the fact that you're negotiating, and to think about the value proposition, and to think about the BATNA, all of those things, and to know where the pain point for the other parties who are at the table are. So, in this particular case, maybe there is no funding whatsoever, right? If we're looking at, squeezing blood out of a stone or something, if there's no funding whatsoever, then it may be a matter of coming together to collaborate and find an alternative solution. Perhaps that would satisfy the interests of everyone involved, and that would be patient safety, staff morale, and some physical responsibilities as well.
I'd love to hear what the folks that actually discussed this case, how they saw it.
Yeah, so maybe I'll just preface by saying that a lot of what we discussed was to lead into some of those conversations around empathy from the other side. So maybe I'll hand it to my group.
We can give you our perspective after that too, because we did this case.
Oh yeah, Sean did it. You guys did it too.
Yeah. Go ahead.
or anyone from either group, really.
Or maybe we'll just have Sean and Dale, for the interest of sake of time, just summarize the capsule of what their group said.
Well, what might be interesting actually is that it sounds like we took different like positions. Like Dale took the position of, sounds like, creating empathy, like on the receiving end of this kind of a request and understanding maybe the environment. I'd hate to put words in your mouth, so why don't we go to you next, Dale? But where ours was like a, you know, the techniques to discuss with a larger group of power holders about how we move forward. So Dale, why don't you start, just because I like the empathy angle. I think it's great.
Yeah, so what we were trying to talk around a lot was where some of these concerns are coming from. So where this bed crunch position and what the perspectives might be from other key stakeholders, say a board of directors at the hospital. So trying to look into what the goals are. So I think if you're the chief of ED, your goal often is protecting your patients and ensuring safety of your patients. Is that everybody's goal? Is that something that you can work with the people that you're discussing with? And that's I think a point that you can start that building block of empathy. That's where we started. What about you, Sean?
Well, we talked about the tools of how we bring it to a committee and how we have them share our perspective, or at least come to understand where we're coming from. There was a lot of initial discussion around data sharing, which we know is kind of at least the minimum viable language, I think, for negotiations with a hospital now. But we also talked about, you know, sharing patient stories and staff member stories and bringing in a variety of stakeholders in that discussion. But then we also talked about, you know, how leaders of committees and leaders of boards can often set larger agendas, and which dovetailed into kind of a broader discussion that at least Teresa and I have had a lot of times before, is that when we come to these committees, these large committees, these hospital committees with requests, we do something that politicians never do. We wait until we get there before we start to change people's minds. And, you know, we talked about engagement long before these meetings happen, to really understand the very specific concerns of those at the committee level, to understand how we move forward and understand their perspectives, and to start changing their minds long before the 12-minute agenda item that we have during the board meeting. And so then we brought that back to kind of a broader storytelling that we're gonna have, and a refining of the story. So that's kind of where we landed.
I've just dropped a beautiful Harvard Business Review article that was dropped this month about storytelling and how it can make or break your leadership. I think it's a really good summary if you're able to access it. You do have access through McMaster's library. It's just kind of hard to get there, but it's possible to get a copy of it. Another one that was pertaining to earlier is for women who are in negotiating situations, or those men who are helping as allies and sponsors and mentors of those women who are going up for negotiations. There's a handout there as well. Sean, I think what you just said really resonates with me, probably because it literally is a conversation we've had before, but the idea that there is a room where it happens. I mean, they have a song about it in Hamilton the musical, right? There's a room where it happens, but now it's a Zoom where it happens. But regardless, there is a place where people are having these conversations before the conversation in the theater of a board meeting. And I'm going to use that provocative term just to remind people that often by the time you get to the boardroom table, there's very little debate that's left. And largely there is a ritual and a theatrical component to why we have those conversations. And if you're not having negotiations before you get to the boardroom table, chances are you might be the only one that didn't. And so it's just start reframing opportunities where you're having touch points with this person, a couple of minutes here. It's why a lot of leaders often run a little bit late. It's because they saw someone in the hallway, asked someone to stay on Zoom for a couple more minutes just to touch base about something. And it's those soft touches that actually end up helping you build the coalition that you might need to make a big change. So if you are not kind of like preparing yourself and understanding all the players and their psychology, you can't negotiate with them. And when you negotiate with one person, then maybe you can do some recon where you triangulate what they're thinking. But if you've got 17 people at the table, it's really hard. That's too difficult. You may need to just ask each player who has a voting share in something to understand their view and to bring them to the table. So whether that's the first, second, or third case, I think the first case is easier because you just have one person you're negotiating with. The second case, you had 50 people you're negotiating with. That's also very different. And then, but you were at least in charge. And in this case, you are not in charge, and it's a whole bunch of people. And so it increases in complexity. So thank you, Catherine, for that Kumon style building of of complexity. I love it.
Yeah, I completely agree. Sorry, Teresa,
Yeah, sorry,
carry on.
that's all. I was just admiring her instructional design for a moment there. I do that sometimes.
I couldn't agree more. And to build on what Teresa's been saying, and as we start to segue into kind of thoughts at the end here, storytelling is incredibly important. These are some of the tools that we all have, and I think we can all work on to continue developing to help with negotiation. And you know who one of the best storytellers that I've ever known was? Andrew Wakefield. Andrew Wakefield, who encouraged people not to vaccinate their children because of autism. Now, if you've read that article, his article has nothing to do with autism. It has nothing to do with vaccines. It's about gut microbiomes. It's a story that he told. He's an awful man, but an excellent storyteller. And while I wouldn't ever want to learn from that, it's that tool. It's that tool set to be able to build that following. That's the type of thing that we can do to be able to help us with negotiation. There are a lot of other tools that we can all learn from. I know that Sarah and everyone has mentioned Never Split the Difference,
Okay.
which I can't agree with more.
He even has the book. Amazing.
I do. I love it.
Yeah.
But
Good, right?
it is very good. And although it's a lot about hostage negotiations, and it's made me very anxious. But let's go on to some of the framework questions, Sarah. So we've talked a lot about negotiating in different scenarios and in different situations. And I just want to bring it back together is that one of the things that we said at the very beginning of this was you don't always know that you're in a negotiation. That's the type of situation that you're having a discussion. I mean, it can be from basic everyday things like trying to convince your toddler to go to bed, which I have no experience in doing, or to a lot of what we've talked about today of career making negotiations and things that are very formal. But being able to use some of these tools that we and others have discussed to build empathy, to storytell, and to build those new perspectives with those that you're discussing and with those that you're having that conversation, that's all this is. And I will speak for myself. I'm learning every day to continue to work on those skills and those tools. So I'm going to have one last spiel, and then I'd love to open it up for some questions and for some discussion as well. But I know in my group, Lindsay was asking at the beginning of this final group discussion here was, where do we get those tools and how can I work on those, to paraphrase you, Lindsay? I think I've talked about that a lot, and a lot of people have had a lot of great resources, but that's what we are all here for as well. Your colleagues are here for that. Your colleagues and your mentors, your friends and family, to help spearhead some of those movements as well. Research beforehand. Negotiations are not, as Teresa said, conducted in a boardroom. They're conducted beforehand. You do your research beforehand, reach out to people, have the discussions, build that empathy. It's that storytelling as well. And you can reference that in the boardroom, in those discussions. And those are the types of things that I think we're all learning together to be able to help us improve our negotiation skills and improve all the situations. You need to be able to also know, though, to take it back to a BATNA. So what will happen if your negotiation fails? This is part of your preparation. What can you do, and what's that best alternative to your negotiation if it doesn't work? Because this is life, or it's medicine, which is also life. It doesn't work out all the time. I can tell you as an infectious disease physician, cefazolin does not always work. But joking aside, I would really love to open it up to everybody here to help continue that discussion. We've got 10 minutes left. Ask away.
Just while you're thinking about it, I just brought another visual aid. So this is one of the books that Sean Mundu has suggested. It's called The Obstacle is the Way. Apparently the sticker says that over 500,000 books have been sold. And another one that I thought you might be interested in, all of you, is this one that I really enjoyed recently. It's called The Social Leadership Handbook. And it really is looking at, in this age where we're very distributed, how to still be sociable and lead and use those points of influence to retain the humanity that we have, even though most of it's probably by texting and Zooming these days. So it's a refreshing read to kind of bring some of those things back.
I was just gonna say, like, I really enjoyed this negotiation. I also helped too with like the timing of things too. Like I remember, like I got a job offer, but I slept on it and then had to really rethink it. So I think if you have opportunities to delay decisions so you can collect evidence and kind of prepare yourself, I think is always helpful too.
Lindsay, can't agree more. Patience is your friend, right? We set up a lot of artificial boundaries for where we want to go with a conversation, with a negotiation, and in setting up those boundaries, sometimes we set ourselves up for a bit of a rush negotiation. I mean, the alternative is, of course, if you set up some deadlines for the person you're negotiating with, maybe that can help set that up too. But patience, patience, patience. It's very rare, of course, that a negotiation has actually been lost on timing. So I think you've hit the nail on the head. Edda, I think I cut you off a little bit. I'm so sorry.
Just a couple statements. First of all, the author of Never Split the Difference was who again, Dale?
Yeah, sorry, I'll put it in the chat. It's Chris Voss, V-O-S-S.
Okay, so right. Chris Voss also has a masterclass.
Yes.
If you're stressed out by the book, you should watch the masterclass.
Yes, his face is like stoic and he's like, I don't know. It's very intense.
And you know, it really depends on the scenario that you're in and how many people you're negotiating with, and you know how you can pull, even with negotiating with that stranger, how can you get information from them that will, without them even realizing that they're giving up certain key information, that you can actually use and become empathetic towards them and then get them on your side. You know, it's such a scenario-based activity that, as you've seen with the cases that you've put forward today, everyone, you have to think in a different route. You have to think differently to how to deal with it. But I would encourage anybody who want to get a masterclass and watch Chris Voss, and that will keep you on the edge of your seat with negotiating.
Thanks, Edda. Happy Halloween, everyone. Yeah, clearly my heart is not built for that sort of thing. I couldn't agree more. Thank you, Edda, for that.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's actually a coincidence that there's actually 3 Emerge docs on this on the panel of organizers today, because I feel like a lot of what we do from day to day in the clinical realm is constant negotiation. And so for any of you who have to make referrals or ask someone to come see a consult in a timely fashion or squeeze someone in a clinic, all of those points are small little negotiations. And so I find reading books that are about bigger non-time crunched negotiations quite interesting, because they do help me realize that the kinds of negotiations that I do, which are usually time limited and crunched because they have to happen within my shift because I got to go home, are not the way that the rest of the world works, and to tend to slow down that timeline when I leave the emergency department, knowing that in the boardroom things can take months. In the academic center, it may take years. And you may need to, what I call, incept people well before the time that you need to pull down the leverage. Ola, that's a very good question. So we do not have the current one-off sessions like this one accredited at this time. So you can clock it under MOC2, just as a sidebar. So it's an unaccredited rounds in section 1 if you want as well.
Phager has a question. Do you want me to read it out, Sarah? Sorry. When discussing a contract, for example, would you actually use the words, I would like to negotiate this offer? Oh, I think that's a great question. Thanks, Sean. I think that that's a great question. And truth be told, I think I would defer to allowing for something to happen a little bit more organically than that. Now, identifying that this is a negotiation, I would find to be somewhat of an overly aggressive tool. But, you know, there's a time and a place for certain things, but I don't know that there would be many times for that, as what I would say personally. And I think that at the end of the day, you're going to have to develop your own personal style. This is what I say to my residents and medical students as well, is that you're going to learn a lot, hopefully, from me and from how I approach patients and how I go through, you know, an infectious disease consult. But you're also going to learn a lot from Teresa when you do a rotation with her, and from Sean when you do a rotation with him, and you're going to pick up tools that you like and tools that you don't like. And from that, you'll develop your own style and you'll develop your own nuances. And I think that that's one of the most important parts about today, is I think we've hopefully been able to show some of those tools and some of those building blocks to allow everybody to continue to make those developments themselves.
Another thing that I actually absolutely love is I love watching TV. I'll just put it out there. And watching West Wing was a revelation for me. It's also like fantasy life right now, but watching the West Wing was amazing to be able to watch how the processes would unfold in a fictionalized world, albeit, and then watching then House of Cards after that to understand how it probably actually works. But both of those shows have lots and lots of examples of negotiations that go right, that go wrong, that come together, that don't come together, and being able to kind of think what would I have done. Each one of those things would be things that I think that you can consider doing if you like watching TV like me.
I think if you mention the word, you know, okay, let's negotiate now, then people start getting their backs against the wall and like, oh, let me get ready for a fight now. Versus if, you know, they don't realize that they're in a negotiation, then you'll probably come out, you know, getting the best agreement, the partner.
Is it true for if it was a male or female?
I don't know. Maybe Teresa can talk to that, since
The recipient of that statement is male or female? Is that what you mean?
No, if the candidate, for example, is a male,
I see.
wanted to negotiate the offer. I mean, stating it, is it perceived differently or not? I think it is, but anyway.
yeah, you're
Probably.
probably right.
So I would just like to encourage everyone to share a key learning in the chat. We'll be collating those and just sort of sharing with the masses after the session. We won't list your name or anything, so don't worry. But we do want to share examples of key learnings that occur during sessions like the one that we have today. I wanted to also flag that we are having a chat series, women's chat series, given the number of questions that are more oriented towards what are the differences between men and women in certain scenarios. And there is one that's coming up in November on imposter syndrome. And I think that a lot of what holds women back in being more aggressive, dare I say, in negotiations is because they feel like perhaps they are not enough, not good enough. They should settle. They don't deserve to champion for themselves, don't deserve to ask for more. And so that is false. But as Teresa has accurately described, there are different ways in which you can wade through or navigate through these conversations to be able to achieve the outcomes that you desire. It is just an unfortunate part of reality that we do have to approach things a bit differently than our male counterparts do. And it's important to recognize that and not always fight it. At a certain point, I'm hoping that there won't be differences, but for now, we do need to navigate in certain ways.
The other session that might be of interest for those who have a more affiliative perspective on leading teams and don't want to think about negotiation, but rather see it as bringing together a group, for instance, is that we're actually doing the women's chat on getting to we. So that collaborative, affiliative kind of point of view, which is kind of the mirror opposite of what we talked about today, was to see it adversarial, but rather, and as they think you saw it, we morphed from adversarial negotiation because of Catherine's awesome instructional design, to the point where you were galvanizing a team and where you were representing a team ultimately. And so I think thinking through all of those things is worthwhile, acknowledging that there's a continuum here. So that's next week. So you can check out our calendar and see that. And we're really excited that you've taken some time to spend time with us. So thanks so much for everyone. I'll hang out here for a couple of minutes with our team, and we're excited that you came out.